What the families need is the backing of government. What they need to know is that as we sort through the wreckage of their destroyed lives and we try to find a reason or some sort of silver lining for them in this moment, that we can look them straight in the eye and we can say it's never going to happen to another family.
Oh, yeah.
All right, gang, let's get straight into it. We've got Vassy Kapelos here from CTV, the legacy hack media, I suppose, with David Eby, who's one of the creepiest individuals in Canadian federal politics. He's a creepy premier, at least. Let's get straight into it. Let's take
right now, though, we want to head live over to British Columbia, where the premier of that province is standing by to talk to us about a whole host of those subjects. Hi, Premier Eby. Good to see you. Thank you for making the time.
Mr. Creepy.
Hey, Vassy. Nice to see you, too.
I did want to start off on the issue of transnational repression, and in particular where your province is concerned, extortion. I know that you have called extortion in BC a terror attack happening in slow motion, essentially. Were you surprised to read headlines quoting a government official last week saying none of that was happening anymore?
We have a serious extortion issue in British Columbia. It's probably our #1 public safety issue, and it is really agonizing for families south of the Fraser. We've had some good progress with police on this. We went from 10 shots fired at people's homes in January to just 1 in February. Our goal, obviously, is 0 and eliminating this threat. We also had charges approved for the first time, actually, for the offense of extortion against 3 individuals in the province. We've seen some very significant arrests, which are welcome, but the work is certainly not done. I will say, Vassy, and I want to be clear, at this point we do not have any information. Police may, not part of the investigation, the information they have, but we don't have any information that the Indian government is involved in.
Let me be very clear.
We have received allegations that the Bishnoi gang was involved in some of this, or it may have been individuals claiming to be associated with that gang in order to gain credibility for their threats. But regardless, we asked the federal government to list that group as a terror organization, and they did.
So just to be clear, though, the Bishnoi gang has taken credit for some of what has gone on in your province, both in your province but also in Alberta. You have never been briefed or been made aware of any connection between that and the government of India, to be clear?
Let's be clear.
Just to be clear, the allegations that we heard that the Bishnoi group was involved in these attacks in British Columbia led us to lobby the federal government to list that organization as a terrorist organization in Canada. And I'm very glad that the public safety minister did do so. There are many published allegations about the Bishnoi group and potential connections with the Indian government. But for what we have information for at the political level, at least in British Columbia, we don't have information about the Indian government's involvement in extortion, and certainly if government officials do, I hope it's forming part of the basis of the police investigation work that's happening.
Okay, I asked just because the RCMP back in 2024 did raise the specter of that, but I'll move on because I also want to ask you about a couple of other subjects, including OpenAI and the involvement of that company in not alerting, essentially, law enforcement to the fact that there was this very troubling activity with the shooter in Tumbler Ridge. I know that the federal AI minister is supposed to meet with Sam Altman today. That's the head of OpenAI. I think they offered you a meeting with senior officials, but you said you want to meet the CEO himself. That meeting is, I'm not sure if you have an exact time for it that you could share, but what is your message that you intend to deliver in that meeting, Premier?
Yeah, we have a tentative meeting set up for this week, and it's an important meeting on a couple of different levels. I mean, first of all, OpenAI has issued public statements that have been very clear that if they had the policies and procedures in place today, that they, at the time of this incident, when they had the information they had, those children in Tumbler Ridge would still be alive, that educational assistant would still be alive, they'd be with their families because they would have notified police. They had the necessary information to bring to police. They could have protected user privacy and brought forward that information and prevented this event from happening. They also advised that their is a serious issue potentially with their flagging process, where the shooter was kicked off of the account but still somehow managed to have a second account. So there are questions about the decision-making process within OpenAI. There are questions about how we could have prevented this. I believe that the people of Tumbler Ridge, the families, are owed an apology at a minimum from OpenAI. But also Canadians are owed the advocacy of OpenAI for a national standard that ensures that every AI company has the same reporting threshold, and that there are serious and meaningful consequences if they don't report to prevent violent incidents from happening. We don't want people asking an AI how to be more effective in their violence without that shooting up a red flag and resulting in a report to police. And so establishing that threshold is delicate work. There are lots of edge cases we can talk about, but without doubt, OpenAI had that information, and if their policies today were in place then, those kids would be alive.
Do you think that those families, Premier, are owed more than an apology? I think back to 2 years ago when you were prepared at the provincial level to enact legislation, to try and pass legislation that would have allowed your province to sue big tech for harms against children. You backed off that legislation, and I've heard you say over the last few weeks that now it's up to the federal government to pursue that policy area. What changed, and why are you backing? Why not bring back something like that, given this experience?
Yeah, these families have all the tools they need to go to court to sue OpenAI, but let's be honest about the situation here. These are families that are shattered. They're devastated. They, I'm sure, have trouble getting out of bed in the morning and facing the day as a result of the impacts of the decisions made by OpenAI.
It's pretty rich coming from him.
This is a firm that recently raised over $100 billion in equity. These are families whose principal breadwinners predominantly work in mine, and they're just getting by. And so the idea of a bunch of shattered families with no legal background taking on a massive firm, one of the largest and best capitalized firms in the world, through litigation, and expecting that that would be a playing field that will result in justice for the families, I think is a bit naive. What the families need is the backing of government. What they need to know is that as we sort through the wreckage of their destroyed lives and we try to find a reason or some sort of silver lining for them in this moment, that we can look them straight in the eye and we can say it's never going to happen to another family. What happened to you is not going to happen again, because we all work together to ensure that the legacy of your children, of the mother of your children, of your wife, that the legacy is that we're going to protect other kids, and it wasn't totally meaningless. And that is an outcome that I hope to be able to salvage from this, and that we will be pushing for, both through this AI initiative that we're doing to push the federal government for a national standard on this, but also in relation to the guns and how the guns ended up in that house, and in relation to mental health and the questions about mental health service availability in a rural and remote community, and whether there's something we could have done. But that's the question I want to answer for those families, and this meeting with Mr. Altman is part of that.
I totally understand the points you're making, Premier, and I certainly wasn't intimating that the families have to go through that process. I believe your legislation that you were going to introduce 2 years ago would have allowed the province on something like their behalf to go after big tech. And I think the bigger issue that Canadians are wrestling right now is how far governments in general are prepared to go to take on big tech, because there have been some troubling signs, even at the federal level, that those are trading chips in a trade war with the United States. Your government 2 years ago said the message to these big faceless companies is you will be held accountable in British Columbia, and then you backed off moving that legislation forward. Why, and do you regret it?
Yeah, we did, and just an important clarification for viewers, Vassy, I know you mentioned it, but I want to underline it. This was the ability for our provincial government to sue these tech companies for population-level harms around things like body image issues in children that come from having targeted extreme dieting videos, photos sent to them, injuries caused by extreme stunting that's incented by targeted videos and photos sent to kids through algorithmic targeting. And also the targeting of children for fraud and advertising that appears to happen without any remorse from some of these giant companies. I met with a family in Prince George who lost a child after that child was targeted through Snapchat by someone who lived in Nigeria who was pretending to be a 12-year-old girl that lived in his local community. And that child ended up committing suicide. The whole process took 12 hours. There's no question that regulation is needed here, that accountability is needed here. These companies are incredibly powerful. They are as large as governments in terms of the money they command. They are tightly integrated with businesses in British Columbia, and businesses sell their products through some of them. So it is an extremely delicate but incredibly crucial piece of work that needs to be done. The federal government has our full support to establish a national standard and to establish national standards for social media companies as well. And we'll back them up 100%. But this issue is in fact a challenging one for one province to take on its own. But the federal government, with all the provinces, I believe we can get it done.
I do want to, before I let you go, Premier, turn on a very different note. I acknowledge to one last subject on something you announced just yesterday, and that is that essentially this time change this weekend for British Columbia would be the last one. Back before you became Premier, but while the NDP was still in government in 2019, legislation was passed to make this change possible. At the time, from what I've read, you had said, and others had said, that the government would wait for American neighbors like Washington State, Oregon, and California to do the same. That's a concern being flagged now by the Board of Trade, the Airport Authority. They're saying it's a mistake not to do this in conjunction with those jurisdictions. Why won't you?
Great question. You know, it was 2019. I was Attorney General. I actually introduced the Amendment Act to give us the authority to end changing our clocks twice a year. We were hopeful that Western U.S. states would come along with us, and the Yukon as well. The Yukon made this change about a year ago. The Western U.S. states all implemented new laws that allow them to do this as well, and they needed the authority of Congress to be able to stop changing their clocks. I wish it weren't true, but it is true. So we waited and waited and waited. It's been 6 years. British Columbians have waited long enough. We're hopeful by taking this step that we will be able to reignite this debate. I noted certainly with enthusiasm, Premier Smith in Alberta now having a look, given that Saskatchewan has stopped doing this, BC has stopped doing this, that maybe it's time for Alberta to stop doing this as well. That's kind of what we're hoping for here, is that these states come along. But regardless, with the current state of the world, we got to look after British Columbians. We got to make sure we're putting British Columbians first. And part of standing on your own 2 feet means making the best decisions possible for your population. And when you talk about the health impacts of changing the clocks, the inconvenience for parents with kids, people with pets, or just waking up tired for absolutely no reason and having no sun at the end of the day for absolutely no reason, it was ultimately the right decision for us to take at this time.
Okay, Premier, I'll leave it on that note. I appreciate you making the time for the conversation. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. We'll wrap it up right there, gang. Aaron Kennedy and Loney, smash the like, hit subscribe. Get your Canadian federal politics right here. Ciao for now. We'll catch you in the next one. Have a good evening.